So here we are. Thank you for being here. And this is the third day of the conference. And I'm very happy because we said we start at 9, 2 minutes later, but that's okay. So only to introduce, let's say, the task that we have to do today. Also this day there will be, let's say, full of events, full of sessions in particular. We have the keynote of Birgit as a first event today. And then just after we have the most influential paper award that will take place here. And we will have, I guess, also at least one of the authors of this paper, and will be announced. Then there will be 4 sessions before and after lunch. And at the end, as usual, we will have a joint summary of all the sessions in such a way that we are all aligned on the topics that we are going to, that we dealt with during the research sessions, and then the conference closing. And there is also the announcement of the next edition, so stay here and see what is going to happen. Few words. Birgit, thanks Birgit for being here. When I was telling Birgit we were very happy when we invited Birgit, and she kindly accepted our invitation. Birgit is a very well-known person in our community. She got a PhD from the Technical University of Munich. She is in Chalmers now, in the University of Gothenburg. She wrote a lot of papers around this discipline, but in particular, papers on sustainability. So vision on how we should behave as a community and how we should influence also the other communities and the society in general in the next future, because I guess we need this. And so, Birgit, I give you the stage and let us know what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, laser pointer. That one is still asleep. Maybe we can fix it. And on that next slide here, we see how to accommodate for nature as a stakeholder in IT systems. So whenever I get asked to present about a topic, my first question is, well, why does this matter? Why does this matter? So I can explain to you why it was worth getting up after what was probably a short night. And hence, I want to answer the question for you. And Julia Roberts gave us part of the answer. There is a short 2-minute YouTube video that I'm not going to play now where Julia Roberts impersonates Mother Nature. And the audio stream goes something like, I have been here for 4.5 billion years. That is 22,500 times longer than you little humans. She didn't say little humans, than you. That means if nature does not have a voice, she's been around for longer, she's gotten rid of other species before us, she might just shake us off the planet. Very well. Yes, there is many people who might label me as a tree hugger, and that's okay. Reality is, nature does not need us. We need nature. So with that, we got together 4 weeks ago at Dagstuhl, invited by the ACM, under the topic climate change, what is computing's responsibility? And they had the objective of making a manifesto. And we came across things like, well, a sustainable computer needs really a sustainable society underneath, so it's not all on us who design IT. We can certainly make a good contribution. We also figured out people are not just consumers. We don't only vote with our wallet, we have other influence. We are also citizens, and we are residents of certain local areas. And we asked ourselves, what is the change we're really looking for? Well, Colin Venters posed that question. He's on the far right in the picture. And the general answer was responsibility and accountability. Responsibility, there's our conference topic again. Now, thinking about this isn't really new. We can go back 50 plus years to the limits of growth. Who of you has heard of the limits of growth? Okay, good, that is a fair share. This book was published in 1972. It was a report to the Club of Rome, and it was describing how resources on Earth are finite. And they did so using system dynamics. So in causal loops, they explained if I take certain actions and they have certain results and then other actions follow, when does that have a reinforcing effect so that the results grow enormously, and when does it have a balancing effect so it limits the results? And one of the main figures in this book is this one that shows once we reach declining resources, because we've exhausted some of the resources of the planet, that means we get to a limit of being able to produce food, and eventually the population has to decline as well. This is 50-year-old news. There have been a few updates since then. In 2019, there was an update that, well, if we continue business as usual, then around 2028, our food production is going to collapse in the way it is currently working. There are other reports like that. What is most important for me to point out right now is they are pretty spot on. So this is a 2021 check against the numbers that they predicted back then. You see the dotted lines are the ones proposed by the limits of growth or projected by the limits of growth, and the thick lines are what has actually happened, and you see they're very close to the predictions. So that still holds, and that means we might foresee economic collapse following, and that will be followed by a population decline. Birgit, this is pretty dire, very early on. Yeah, but we've been doing things too. We have come up with the Sustainable Development Goals. They were the followers of the Millennium Goals that we had around 2000, and now this is our time horizon until 2030. This is my favorite illustration of the Sustainable Development Goals because it shows the basic goals around the biosphere, around the environment, and then it groups around society and then around economy. I do find it slightly concerning that there is only 4 around the bottom, which seems to be the major foundation for the rest of it to work. But it shows what the definition of sustainable development was back in 1987, the Brundtland definition. It said, let's satisfy our needs only such that the needs of future generations can still be met. It never talked about anything other than humans. It was for preserving the existence of humans on this planet. And that doesn't work with without what is underlying. We can't do anything without the environment, and yet we continue to say, oh, we should better account for environmental externalities, as if they were external. They are not. The Sustainable Development Goals are on a pretty high level of abstraction, one might think, unless you know that there are targets defined for each of those goals. And here's where we get pretty much to requirements engineering. So you said, in order to make life below water sustainable, what needs to happen? And then when we look through those, we see we need to significantly reduce marine pollution. We need to avoid significant adverse impacts. That sounds like a lot of underspecified requirements. We do get to a first specified requirements by 14.5, where it says conserve at least 10% of coastal and marine areas. That is something we have quantified. We're not going to fix the targets in this talk. I wanted to point out that, yes, these are all requirements, and some of them are quantified and some not, because maybe people didn't know what was reasonable to set. But what I can show you is an overview of how far we are. The dashed line is where we want it to be by 2030. And the colored lines show us how far we have gotten. It doesn't look that great, because we only have 5 years left out of the 30 that this was a time frame for. In a different illustration, we see that we are significantly underperforming, where we're actually moving away from the target in the opposite direction for many of these goals. We have done a lot of good, don't get me wrong, especially in SDG 3 and 4 around well-being and around education, we've done great. There are others where we're lacking or where we're behind significantly. So now, science to the rescue. We have sustainability science, right? That's going to fix it. I hope so. The thing is, we don't have sustainability science as such, because inherently sustainability is very interdisciplinary. So we have disciplines like Earth system sciences, space, earth, and environment, environmental sciences, not one that covers everything that we would need to cover. And I found this beautiful illustration by Karen Branson that was showing what could be a vision of future sustainability science that would integrate in transdisciplinary research different disciplines, and that would also pull in science and business and would provide an economic and social architecture, because we can't do this on a scientific level only. We do need this to be connected in society, and because the economy is such a strong running force in our lives, we also need that to be on board. There's still a way to go to that. Now, little reality check. Do you believe in climate change? This is a very strange question that I got asked a couple of times when I was still working in the US. I was like, I don't have to believe, it's right in my face. So, luckily, Johan Rockström and colleagues to the rescue from the Stockholm Center of Resilience, in 2009, they published a report that was called Planetary Boundaries in Nature. And they defined these 9 constraints, the planetary boundaries, as what needs to stay at a certain level in order for Earth to be a safe operating space. And by this definition, via risk management, for this to be a safe operating space, they kind of take away some of this wishy-washy criticism of people believing or not believing. It's really not about that. This is risk management. If the Earth gets too many degrees warmer, bad news, we're not going to survive. If the ocean gets too acidic, we're not going to make it. If we pollute our fresh water too much, we're out of the game. If the biosphere integrity gets harmed too much, we're out of the game. And as you can see, there's a lot of red. So we have effectively pushed Earth beyond 6 of those 9 planetary boundaries, which means we have successfully destabilized our planetary ecosystem. Good. So we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Birgit, is this a doomsday talk? No, by no means. I did want to show you that, yes, it's pretty crucial to act now, and also there is a lot of good that has been happening. In this model, you see on the outskirts the 9 planetary boundaries that we just spoke about. On the inside, Kate Raworth said, if humans can't be happy and have to constrict themselves too much, there's just going to be a lot of conflict, and we're not going to get anywhere in a peaceful way. So she established these social boundaries to say, in order for people to be willing to make a good effort, we want them to be well. We want them to have their health taken care of. We want them to have housing and water. And what stays in between these 2 sets of boundaries is called a safe and just space for humanity. It's called the donut model. So donut economics has been proposed as a way to move forward, staying within the planetary boundaries, yet satisfying those social boundaries. How do we do that? There is a movement called degrowth that has gotten a lot of criticism, by the way. Why? Because maybe they didn't choose their name so well. Degrowth sounds like, oh, we're against anything growing and we're going to be very ascetic and we're not going to do anything from here now anymore. What they should really have called it is changing incentives. Because it was the idea of, what if we moved from economic growth as the one paradigm that we run after to the things we really care about? The degrowth movement depicted our economic system as a subsystem on planet Earth. So we're back to systems thinking, system dynamics. We have solar energy coming in and giving us warmth to survive, and we have natural resources on the planet. Now, in the economic system, we now take in some of the energy and materials. We produce products and services, and we have some degraded energy and degraded materials coming out. We manage to recycle some of that, and we produce low-grade thermal energy as humans. It's a little warmer around me. So far, so good. Now, what degrowth really relies on is principles like circularity, let's cooperate, let's share the yield, let's have local production and not ship things around the planet where we can. Let's have a good work-life relationship and joie de vivre. All of these principles on the right, I would definitely subscribe to. So if you come across that term again and it's harsh criticism, remember that these are the actual principles that it relies on. And while some of the criticism sure has its point as well, I think they should have mainly called it changing incentives, and it would have avoided a lot of the conflicts in it. If you would like to read more about degrowth, I recommend the book Less is More by Jason Hickel. Now, IT has not been sleeping in this area. We had one person starting back in 1990 to think about sustainability informatics. This gentleman is Lorenz Hilti. He's by now a professor emeritus in Zurich, and he came up with IT for sustainability as a field. And this is one of the central models he proposed, where he said, well, you can use IT for good or for bad. It can have a positive environmental impact or a negative environmental impact. And we see there are direct effects like life cycle effects. There are indirect effects, which means the effects that our users cause in their operational environment when they use our systems. For example, if I use a car that is run with the help of a lot of software, then the impacts that my usage of the car has would be considered an indirect effect. And then third order effects are the systemic effects. If many people use the system over a long period of time, what happens? And you see here, yes, we've had deep structural change towards a dematerialized economy. Your music is probably not on a record and CD shelf anymore, unless you're specifically a fan of those mediums. Maybe it's a streaming service that you use now. Also applies to other goods. And then on the right side, you see the rebound effects. What's a rebound effect? Who's familiar with the term rebound effect? Good. So this is my favorite reference that I've ever used because it's way older than software engineering or requirements engineering. It's from 1866 by William Jevons. In the 1860s, England figured out how to burn coal more efficiently. So now they had to use less coal to get to the same amount of energy for heating houses. That is great. So they thought our usage of coal is going to go down. Au contraire, the usage of coal went through the roof. Why? Because energy got cheaper. So the Jevons paradox says, if an improvement in technology doubles the amount of output with a same staying given amount of fuel, then that means we're going to rise our demand. And that is the definition of the rebound effect. We see that, for example, in our cars. They are more efficient than ever. They're incredibly energy efficient. I'm really astounded by that. So that means it costs less to drive them, and then we drive more. And for our lovely computing devices, the miniaturization leads to a machine like that would have run an entire company a few decades ago, and now we usually own one or several devices each, as depicted by this little comic version. These new cars, they're so efficient, they drive everywhere. Now, given this rebound effect, where do we stand in our carbon emissions? That looks pretty dire. Through time, they have tremendously expanded, and there's this narrative around that, oh, we've already decreased our emissions so much. It doesn't show up in the statistics significantly yet. Also, it makes China look like the worst player on the planet. If we change the view to per capita, then it starts looking different, and there are other countries who are higher ranking. And China is per capita somewhere level with many European countries as well. But then there's also that little piece made in China. So a lot of the manufactured goods, and this is where I'm not 100% sure how they calculated the data for this graph, a lot of our manufactured goods, household goods, if you walk through your home and check how many things say made in China, then we know that some of that share we're probably responsible for as well. So how much does computing contribute? Computing. At the ICT4S conference, at the ICT for Sustainability conference, there used to be this figure floating around that said, IT is responsible for 2% of the world's global emissions. That's about as much as, and then they would compare it to something. I'm like, 2%, okay, that's not too bad. And then I look at 16% transport, 18% agriculture, 7% building, 28% electricity, 31% industry. Now tell me, how many of those work without IT these days? Everybody uses IT systems and software-intensive systems, and hence we can have a giant impact with what we do in requirements engineering. And there's a reasonably big field on green computing out there that has been very active for the last 20 years in several areas. I'm not sure that green computing is the best term. It's an umbrella term for all things that I can claim have a positive effect on if we want to be more environmentally friendly. It includes things like, let's develop energy efficient algorithms. We know that comes with a rebound effect, probably. The researchers that research on that don't like to hear that. I do think they do valuable work, and we can't pretend to not know about the other side of that. We work on e-waste reduction. We have done great research on that. Unfortunately, the ways how we can really take e-waste apart and recycle it are so expensive that they are hardly in use. That means we still have giant mountains of it. We have renewable energy integration, sustainable software development, cloud computing, all sorts of cost savings and virtualization. Cloud computing, virtualization. So I don't need a server anymore. I can just run that thing in the cloud. I've done a couple of life cycle analysis of this. It depends strongly on how you use it to see whether it actually has a positive effect on carbon emissions. So what we see in the world now is a lot of greenwashing. A very big company, one of the big five, said, by 2030, we have set a goal to achieve 0 net emissions across all of our operations and value chain. Like, that's a big promise. All right, let's look into the fine print. It has a footnote. The footnote says we aim to reduce 50% of our combined scope 1, 2, and 3. That is great. Compared to 2019. Good. All right, still good. For the other 50%, we plan to make investments in nature. Okay, so you just cheated yourself out of the other 50% by paying for it. Here comes in carbon trading. So what happens in carbon trading is I run some kind of manufacturing plant that blasts dirty stuff in the air, and I pay you to plant a forest. So now I'm good, right? This is what we call weak sustainability. Weak sustainability means I can offset my emissions by paying somebody else to do something good. Strong sustainability would be, no, let's only account for the emissions that are actually occurring. Don't buy your way out of them. So while they promise to reduce 50% and pay for the rest, it doesn't make the other 50% go away. So yay for the 50% reduction, yay for investing into renewable resources and all that. It doesn't make the rest go away. And they're not the bad player in this. There's a ton of greenwashing out there, and you might be able to tell by a rise of 400% of sustainable branding, sustainable companies in the last few years. A lot of that is, well, we can argue for a way of how we do something good, so let's write that in capital letters on the front of our product and be a sustainable brand. And I do honor all the genuine efforts. They often come with a lot of greenwashing. So let's fix it with IT. I'm sure we can fix it. There's so many times when I've talked to people about sustainability challenges on our planet, and they said, but we have technology. We're just going to develop this next amazing thing, and it's going to solve it all. Except techno-solutionism doesn't necessarily work. It is kind of saying, I am sure there is going to be some magic in the future that is going to solve all this, and maybe there is, and maybe there isn't. One person to point this out is Christoph Becker, a colleague and friend of mine at the University of Toronto, who wrote a book called Insolvent, where he lays out how computational thinking has gotten us very far. It's a really smart way to break down challenges, to decompose, to recognize patterns, to work with abstraction, and to design smart algorithms, to reuse a bunch of things. We're really good at that. We're so efficient. It does come with a set of shortcomings. As we've also heard yesterday in the industry panel and in some of the industry talks, we don't always think all the way to the end. We don't see all the side effects that something brings with it. We may forget certain stakeholders or choose not to design for them because their percentage isn't high enough to make it worth the while for the customer and for the shareholders. So there's a lot going on under the surface, from our mental models and biases in them to structures of the system that they are ingrained in, to how this eventually shows up in our technology. Also, given these challenges, let's just make them all 10 times more efficient and powerful. Enter the AI. The AI that we've been playing around with so much and very curious about, and I use that term very loosely to include everything that is powered by it, it has a lot of environmental costs that tend to get forgotten. It is used for some really important work and put to good use. It is also used a lot for entertainment without any thought whatsoever to the environmental impacts that it has. Back to Christoph Becker. He recently launched a campaign that is called #SaveTheAI. And in that campaign, and you can find the link on the bottom of the slide, he points out the tremendous environmental impacts in an ironic way. So he's been walking around putting little information sheets on water coolers saying, do you really need to drink this water? AI needs this water because we're cooling a ton of data centers with it, and so on and so forth. And he does the same for some of the air pollution and some other impacts. There is not only a humorous campaign around it, there is also a lot of quantified research by now, for example by Han et al., that quantified public health impacts by air pollution. And we have seen the air pollution increasing tremendously in parts of the US and probably also in other parts, but this is where they chose the scope of their research to be. Links to be followed up on. Okay, so there's a lot of challenges there. And then we also know that when we develop systems, there is often a way to misuse them. Sometimes the misuse is designed into them, and sometimes people find it. So the Center for Humane Technology in Silicon Valley, composed by a few people who used to work for big tech companies and found their ways of working not aligned anymore with their own ethics, they released a documentary called The Social Dilemma. Who of you seen The Social Dilemma? Okay, if you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. It was talking about the race for engagement. It is how social media is using very basic human psychology to make us addicted, and all the bad impacts that come from that are listed on the slide. A few years later, they followed up with The AI Dilemma, this time not in a polished documentary, but in a talk that they gave to a select audience for the Center of Humane Technology and that they broadcast on YouTube. And it was reminding us, oh, do you remember The Social Dilemma? All those challenges from the left part of the slide? Yeah, we haven't solved any of these, but now let's just give it a ton more power with AI capabilities. So now we see a race to scale and release AI capabilities as fast as possible, and not always reflected. As we also heard yesterday from Simon in the panel, sometimes customers ask and want that thing, and there is no real reason other than, well, that's currently a hype, and so we kind of want to have it too. So that is questionable. Now, the Center for Humane Technology is also not a group of doomsday proclaimers, they sat down and said, what can we do about this? And they came up with this framework of how to tell if a technology will serve humanity well. And for that, they talk about the technology should have a focus on the big picture. Like, is this going to help us prevail? Does this support people, or does it kind of restrict users? Which values does this product center? Does it respect human nature, or does it exploit some of our psychological mechanisms that we just can't seem to be able to escape, or only with a lot of willpower that we know we have a limited amount of? Does it center fairness and justice? Who are we leaving behind with this system? Because we're often leaving people behind, and that might not be intentionally, but because we don't think about it. And does this product enable building a shared understanding about the world? I highly recommend watching this talk. They don't have a release of that framework as a white paper or anything. This is an hour well invested. I talk about it to my students a lot. We also heard over the last couple of days, well, is the really only way to get companies and developers to change ways of how to do things by legislation and by standards? Maybe. We've also not been sleeping on that side. There's two families of ISO standards that I want to point out in this context. One is on environmental management. You see the breakdown on the right side. It goes around life cycle assessment and performance evaluation and auditing and environmental communication. And then we also have the 26,000 family on corporate social responsibility. ISO standards are a good thing to comply with. They're not always prescribed by legislation. So what have we done with real legislation? For example, we have included nature into the constitution in Ecuador. This was actually the first country worldwide. They proposed this already in the 70s. On the right side, you see an illustration of Pachamama, as they call Mother Nature in Ecuador. And it finally got voted on in 2008. They were the first to grant nature constitutional rights for the air, for mountains, rivers, forests. And they have made a number of decisions in favor of nature. Why is Ecuador so relevant for this? Because there were many companies that were loving to chop down Ecuadorian rainforest for the very sound reason of making money. And it hasn't solved all their problems, obviously not. But they are the first ones to have it in their constitution, followed by New Zealand. New Zealand was founded on, as it exists today, was founded on the Treaty of Waitangi. The British marched in and said, this is now ours. The Maori were warrior tribes, so like, yeah, no. So there were a lot of wars going on until they finally found a settlement in the Treaty of Waitangi. And based on this Treaty of Waitangi, they did now sign the Te Urevera Act and also allow nature in the form of some national park areas and other areas rights. Also, our host for this conference has an example of this. So the Mar Menor saltwater lagoon was granted rights in 2022. The lagoon and its basin are recognized as a legal person and are granted explicit rights. We will see how that story continues and if there's going to be more areas that get protected. What does this lead us to? Nature is a key stakeholder. I found this really nice blog article when I was looking for the tie-over, and Bob Willard made a really compelling argument. He said, we rely on all these ecosystem services. So if we rely on all those ecosystem services that are being provided, provisioning services, regulating services, supporting services, and we have significant global risks associated with it, then nature should definitely be a stakeholder on every single one of our stakeholder maps. It cannot be different. There are other people who think so. I found a model by an NGO called Public Planet Partnerships that was also centering a number of non-human stakeholders in here. And on the left-hand side, we see human stakeholders, some of them being surrogate stakeholders for nature in terms of government and regulatory bodies, and as representatives of NGOs. We have also not been sleeping in requirements engineering. This is purely by chronological order. These are a couple of approaches that have been around for a bit that I want to briefly touch upon. First one, written by yours truly, was a sustainability goal reference model that I proposed back in 2013. And you can see in the center that it's based around the values. So at the very top, I break down sustainability into these 5 dimensions of economic, technical, environmental, human, and social. And then each of them stands for a set of values. And then at the bottom, you see how those can be broken down into activities. That was my start. So I decided to work on sustainability around 2009. I went to my back then PhD supervisor and I said, I'm going to finish this PhD thesis on requirements engineering. I think it matters. And also, I've considered leaving the university and go work for Greenpeace, but the only position they had open for somebody with a computer science degree was a network administrator, and you really don't want me as a network administrator. Hence, I've decided to dedicate my future research to environmental sustainability. And then later on, I also expanded to social sustainability. And he said, Frau Penzenstadler, you know, we were very formal back then in Germany. Do you really think that's going to be a thing? And here I stand 15 years later and I get to talk to you about it in the keynote. So you be the judge of it. A second contribution I made was a stakeholder reference model where I showed this is how you can use those different sustainability dimensions or some other approaches. The paper outlines 4 approaches of how I can find stakeholders that would be willing to represent on behalf of sustainability. Not exactly nature at the time, it was more who can I find to support these different dimensions of sustainability. And there is quite a reference list on the right that we can find. Because we were working a lot with artifact-based requirements engineering at the time, and it was a way how to very easily get it into people's heads to remember. And I still like artifact-based requirements engineering. I integrated it into a simple artifact model to say, okay, where can we infuse sustainability here? We can start in the stakeholder model as shown on the previous slide. We can integrate it into the objectives and goals as shown on the slide before that. We can also think about how does our business models align with sustainability? Where do we find it in that? And then, yes, there are very genuine approaches of that, and sometimes we find some greenwashing approaches of that. And then on the right side, in the solution domain, we can then get to a system vision where we can make sustainability explicit, and we can also bring it into the usage model and into the sustainability analysis. Now there's a slight jump in timeline. So this is an early version of the sustainability analysis, but where did that come from? We move to the 2014 edition of the RE conference, where we wrote the Karlskrona Manifesto. We ran the 3rd iteration of the workshop on requirements engineering for sustainable systems there, and we got so hyped up by a proposal of Christoph Becker, who you remember from earlier as the author of Insolvent, that we sat down for a large part of the week, all the evenings, to write this manifesto where we pointed out a number of misconceptions about sustainability and a number of principles that we think would be worth adhering to. And we have about 500 people who signed the manifesto and who said, this is great. And then the usual question that comes next would be, so what do we do now? And we're like, oh. Back to the drawing board. And this is where we developed the Sustainability Awareness Framework, known as SUSAF, that we've also presented at REFSQ'25. We came up with, let's use these 5 dimensions and then provide a set of questions so that people can dig into what are the potential impacts of the system that I'm currently developing on this dimension. And then to the right, you see the SUSAF diagram, which is an overview of the outcomes of this elicitation workshop. The QR code will take you to the workbook that we made for this. And on the bottom left, you see a number of people who have contributed to this. I'm missing. That's okay. Now, for the Sustainability Awareness Framework, we've tried this out over the last 8-9 years in about 10 universities, and I think we have 10 case studies with companies now, and on industry conference workshops. They are all pretty positive about applying it. They walk out there with good ideas, and then when we follow up a few months later and say, okay, can you tell us about the results? Like, what did you do? What did you do? Yeah, there was a fire burning over there, and we had to go extinguish that, and so the thing is still laying here. I'm like, oh, okay. So why are a lot of the things not happening that we discover in these workshops? And is there a way how we can change something about that? And this is where we started thinking about leverage points. Leverage points were brought under this name to the world by Donella Meadows, who is one of the authors of Limits to Growth, the book that motivated the very beginning of this talk. And this is my favorite illustration of the leverage points because it makes very clear we have this system on the left, and then we have some leverage points that if I push down on them, it's going to take a lot of them to really make a difference. And what you will find is that the closer you are to that system, these leverage points are easier to change, but it's going to take a lot of them, a lot of effort to effect a change in the system. So when I talk about constants, parameters, and numbers, that would be something like what a bus ticket costs in a transportation system. That would be a parameter. Or how many people I can fit on one bus. That's a parameter. And then I can go to buffer sizes and material stocks and flows and say, okay, can I change a little bit the physical events of that system? Those are changeable, fairly easy. Buffer sizes, I can have a couple of reserve buses, no problem. So if people get very excited about taking the bus, we can accommodate for that. But then relative delays, negative feedback loops, positive feedback loops, and information flows, that requires a bit more effort. So maybe now I need an IT system. It turns out that if you look at public transport systems around the world, because in cities they're one major way of increasing sustainability, people often are unsatisfied when they have to stand at the bus stop and they're like, I don't know if this bus is coming. Is it? Will it? What I've seen in Gothenburg, where I get to live now, is the information systems are on the minute. I know that this bus is coming in 7 minutes and unfortunately it has 2 minutes delay, but I'm not going to stand there at the time the bus should be there and be like, will it come at all? I know it's only coming in 2 minutes, so I'm fairly confident that I can rely on that system. And the same has been shown true in public transport systems around the world, that it significantly increases the trust of the users into the system if they know how much delay there will be, because it's normal that there will be a bit of delay in city traffic. Now, if I go further up, I see it's going to get harder to change. The rules of the system, the structure of the system, the goals of the system. Here we're talking really about how a system is embedded in society, about the social context of it. It's going to take a lot more effort to change that. And then when we get to the mental models, the mindset, economic growth. Maybe it could be something else. Maybe we can change the incentives of the system. We know that that is super hard because people have been talking about economic growth as a paradigm doesn't work for the last 50 years. Have we changed it? Nope. So we know that that is a leverage point that is very, very hard to change. And if we managed to change that, we could tremendously change all the systems that we have. I tried to translate this for software engineering with a public transport system back in 2018 in an IEEE software article. And so you will find the breakdown and explanation, because I know it's very hard to explain in one slide what leverage points are and how we can make use of them. Hopefully you got the general idea. And if you're interested in more details, then you're welcome to read up on them. because I have a couple more people's works that I would like to introduce you to. You know, RE in one corner, HCI in the other corner, they have also not been sleeping. So a few years ago, Bill Tomlinson, who was my former postdoc supervisor, and Ankita Raturi, a close friend of mine who now runs the Gathering of Open Agriculture Technology Conference every year in the US, they came up with the idea of, we like personas, right? If we gave nature personas, maybe there would be a bit more, it would be a bit more tangible to include them as a stakeholder. And so here you see Amelia, the Amazon rainforest, described in the form of a persona. In the usual way how we do that, with certain characteristics, with a user story, with some data backing it up. If you remember, on that stakeholder model from public-private partnership, there was also a big set of non-human stakeholders that were mostly animals. So what about animals? They're kind of our closest relatives in this big nature system. And we've also had people in the requirements engineering community and the HCI community working on that. There's a bit more work at Kai on it than at RE, but in 2017, we did have Dirk van der Linden with Anna Zamansky back then present their work on requirements engineering for non-human users, specifically for dogs in that case. And Dirk van der Linden runs a lab at Northumbria University on tech for animals. It's where they look mostly into what systems are animals directly influenced by or indirectly, and how can we account for their needs being met in there. So that's a bit of the work that has been out there. And then I also found this student, I couldn't find the name. I only found this blog post on Penn State, who went to spend 4 months observing birds to see how IT systems would influence those birds and what needs we might better take into account. It was also presented at Kai 2021. Let's bring it back to this conference. Social responsibility, where we know now where we're at. Now you know. We've had many hand raises in between them, and when I ask, are you familiar with that? Now you all know. And as we learned from Uncle Peter and Spider-Man many years ago, with great power comes great responsibility. So we know now we get to center the values and we get to question the why and question it again. And I want to leave you with a few suggestions of how you can get started. The first slide is for the educators. I thoroughly believe that it can also be translated for everybody working in industry. If you get to give workshops every once in a while, then that might be as applicable to them. Back in 2019, when I joined Chalmers and Gothenburg University, we had and still have a function that's called sustainability representative for each department at the university. Back then, that was Jennifer Horkoff, and then when I started, she said, so I'm taking on this new service role. Since you're doing a lot of research on sustainability, would you want to take this over? And I said, yeah, of course. And in the first year, we ran a workshop together on how can we help people integrate sustainability a bit more into their curricula. Because at the time, Gothenburg University was strongly pushing for sustainability labeling of courses. Both universities in that city have it written in their mission statement, and that was one of the main reasons why I was drawn to that position. And then it turns out, well, in the nitty-gritty everyday work, it's not always integrated everywhere. So what can we do? And based on that first workshop, I started working on a guideline that I've been working on for the last 4 years. How do you sustainify your syllabi? And I made it rhyme so it would stick in people's heads and they would remember. And that can start with, well, is it a rather abstract subject that we're talking about, or is it a very applied course? And depending on that, I can choose which way to go. If it's a very theoretic course, then I can find practical examples to underlay that. If it is a very practical course saying let's do case studies with a company, then I can choose a company that has a mission aligned with this and that supports some of the SDG targets maybe with their work. I can integrate it into the learning objectives, because it turns out if it's not in the learning objective and if it gets not assessed, the students are not going to put much effort into it. Now, I've had conversations over this. I have a colleague who is very passionate about including diversity and equity in all of his classes, and he says, wait, if I put it into the learning objectives and assess it, then students might actually be less motivated. They might actually be happy to discover that there is these things that they get on top of it, but if I make it part of the curriculum that I'm going to assess, maybe it deters them. So that conversation aside, I think it is a good idea to integrate it in the learning objectives and to give it a solid place. If there is no way to do that because some people are against it, I can still sneak it in without a learning objective. That's okay. And then within my course, I can maybe find a subtopic that relates to one of the SDGs or one of the SDG targets. And there's also a couple of helpful frameworks out there, like the sustainability competencies framework that is referenced here. Wieck et al. And Brondiers et al. They put in 5 sustainability competencies that include systems thinking and futures thinking and a couple of others. You can find this guideline on Zenodo. I've published it and it is available for everybody to use. Please pass it out there if you find that useful. Birgit, that sounds like a lot of work. I have 1 hour I can dedicate to this, but I don't have the time to prepare for that hour. Can you just give me something that I can pull out of the box? I cannot, but there have been other people who did. So there is a couple of really good serious games out there that you could use within a requirements engineering context. One of them is called the Rebound Archetype Cards. They were developed at Lancaster University, and they will find ways to explain within a system what types of rebound effects could your system possibly lead to, and have students think about that. And the other one is by the Artifact Group. They're called the Tarot Cards of Tech. And one of these tarot cards is Mother Nature. So it's a set of cards that gives students the guiding questions of, think about this aspect for your product. You see on top of it the radio star. Which product is being made obsolete by the introduction of your product? And then Mother Nature, if the environment was your client, how would your product change? So that is if you have no time whatsoever, but could maybe spare half an hour in class or in a tutorial to have people play around with these new ideas. Links to both of them are provided. You could also have your students think a bit about what they do in their research. And if this template looks familiar, it is because it is after the Open Business Model Canvas. That is a 1-pager, how to describe a business model. That same idea, what are the most important information elements that I need to think about if I want to do sustainability research, is captured on this slide. And I know the font is a little bit too small to read all of it, but the idea is, in general, I list all the resources that I have, I list the values that I want to center, and then in the very center of the template, of the Canvas template, I can sketch a research vision. That one has been published in a book chapter recently, Sustainability Competencies in Research, book on empirical research in software engineering, specifically on teaching it. Back to this point of, if it's not in legislation, it ain't gonna happen. So what do we do with all our smart research results that we wish to carry forward? We get to understand how to influence policy. And now you will find a template that looks a bit similar to this one, but has different content. Because it turns out it's a really cool template and you can use it for a lot of purposes. So in the last 3 years, I was part of a cost action on gender equity. And I got to lead work package 5 on strategy and dissemination. And part of that was policy influence. Policy influence. Okay. I had no clue about policy influence, so I read up on a bunch of resources, and then in our last workshop, we got to teach everybody else in the project how to do policy influence. And I thought, how do I distill everything that I've learned into something simple enough that I can teach within a 2-hour workshop. And this was the result of it. So it also helps people list all the resources and the contacts that they might need for influencing policymakers, and find a timing that works for them. Also write down, how am I going to evaluate whether I was successful? Because we know I can do a lot of things for awareness and for getting people's attention, but if I don't know how I'm going to measure what attention I got, then I won't know whether this was effective and whether this is worth doing again. So I get to think about that as well. That one is also available on Zenodo. Please do use it. And then a very last thought, because we are at a conference. Recently, the University of Gothenburg has started to crack down on us a bit because we happen to be the department with the most travels. Uh-oh. And especially as a sustainability researcher, I've been sitting with this one a lot. How do I justify traveling to a conference, taking an airplane, if environmental sustainability is so high on my list of values? And then I looked into the carbon footprint of an event. The largest part of it is travels. So yes, we can make a lot of local efforts, and that is important. And also, the largest part is still the travels of getting to this place. We also know it's a major incentive when we work in academia that we get to travel every once in a while, or for certain company positions. There was the grand idea of let's have virtual meetings and virtual conferences instead of in person. We did this during COVID to the extent that many people got burned out from being online. And now that the world is open again, we simply do both, no problem. So we have added and kept a lot of virtual meetings in addition to physical meetings that we have. Rebound, again. And I recently did a direct comparison of the travel options and their consequences. So it takes me about 2.5 days to get down from Gothenburg to Barcelona. That is not 2.5 days of traveling for 8 hours and then resting somewhere. That includes night buses and continuous travel and about 17 connections. I couldn't do a comparison of the cost because it was 5 different booking pages that I would have needed to make logins for to even find out how much the tickets are. And I didn't want to invest that much time into it, but it does bring up some questions like, can I request of my employees to take night buses to get places? That is probably not compatible with workers' rights in Sweden, and Sweden is very strong about workers' rights. And there's also the question of, is my university supportive of me taking an entire work week to travel to the conference and back, in addition to the work week of the actual conference? Unclear. I'm going to have that conversation over the next few weeks. And so it's an intermediate step, which leaves me with the question, was my flight here worth it? And that actually depends on all of you. Because my flight here was worth it if I could inspire you enough to take actions, to change things, to do something in your education, to maybe do something within your research, that in the end, that offsets the carbon costs that I exerted for getting here. And I know that that is only one of many possible metrics. It is the metric that we've been using most to break this down for. That concludes my talk. I hope I'm going to be useful as ICSI Sustainability Chair in 2027. We'll see what ideas I come up with in the meantime. If you would like to stay engaged with this work, IREB has recently started a special interest group on sustainability that I'm part of. It is led by Stan Bühne and Eddie Grön, and we currently run a survey and we would love to hear your opinion. So get that QR code, keep it for later, participate after this talk. It'll only take 10 minutes of your time, and we are planning to repeat it annually. And get in touch with Eddie or Stan if you would like to be part of this special interest group. Also, you may have heard of the survey Naming the Pain in Requirements Engineering by Daniel Mendes and many, many, many friends. So after you've taken this QR code, I want to remind you that the current version of that is also out again We are still keeping it open just for a couple of weeks longer. We've extended it 1 or 2 times to make it more relevant. It has a really solid database by now. It's proven very useful to many people. So if you could answer it and maybe put it out on LinkedIn again or somewhere else, we'd be very, very grateful for you. There we are. And now I'm very happy to take a bunch of questions. Let's discuss. This one?
Thank you, Birgit. So we have a task. When we come back home, we must try to understand what are the strategies that we can use to support this effort. I'm pretty sure that we are going to do it, and we are also going to spread this voice in order for having this trip sustainable. So, questions?
Okay, thank you, Birgit, for this inspiring talk. Here I have a conflict when I think about what can we do in order to improve sustainability. You very well talked now about individual measures, about traveling, reflecting, and so. But then as a community, we have a problem, because if you take a look to our papers in this conference, you find half of them making tons of experiments with ChatGPT, with generative AI. And it's a kind of game that you cannot avoid to play in some sense, because we want to publish, we want to have results. And here I cannot take an individual position. That's my point. Because if I say, okay, I don't touch generative AI anymore, then as a professional, as a researcher, that it's my job, I'm losing my capabilities. Therefore, this is a very tricky and weak question, and therefore I would like to know your opinion as a community, how can we proceed? Thank you.
Thanks. That is a very good question. So, Steve Easterbrook, way back when, who I, by the way, met at the first RE conference in 2008 here, he said to me that it may have already been that year. I wish that every researcher only got 10 publications in their lifetime. It would so increase the quality of the research that we put out there, and it would so increase what we choose to invest our energy in. I am not in favor of running little experiments just for the sake of pushing out a paper. I really am not. I am well aware of the peer pressure that we have in academia, the publication pressure, and of what I loudly speak up against it at every opportunity. I don't think it is doing us a service on very many different levels, neither as a journal associate editor, where I'm struggling to find reviewers because we have so tremendously increased the number of submissions. I don't think that is an indicator of quality. I really don't. And I've had these conversations with many people over the years. We are the ones who can change it. There's different levels of agency that we have here in this room. As a professor with tenure, I have a lot more say in the system than somebody who's maybe just starting out as a PhD student. And yet, even, I always thought at the level of a tenured associate professor, I'd feel so empowered I can do anything, and then I still hear, oh, publication pressure and this and that. And I know at the same time, I am about as strong in a role in the system as I'm gonna be. So if I don't act now to start doing things differently, when can I? And I have made choices for not publishing stuff, and I might be in the safe position to do so and to say I'm not gonna succumb to that and run after many publications, and I acknowledge that privilege. I can't solve it. I know that it is a systemic flaw that we have worked up to as a research community. Like, we made it. we're the only ones who can change it. And so we've had conversations at our university a lot over the past 2 years about academic citizenship and that there is more things to it than research output. At the same time, there's a lot of conversations about striving for excellence going on that are counterindicating some of those. So I think it's an ongoing conversation and we cannot shy away from it being uncomfortable. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I know we need to talk about it more and I know we need to change it because it's breaking the quality of research and it's breaking our backs. It's not doing anybody any good. We found a way to put it into numbers and now we're running after the metric. Great. I don't think it's the way to go and we're the only ones who have the power to change it. We do. Yeah. Okay, so I didn't get the last point about generative AI. Can you repeat that?
In general, if I want to use, independently of my policy, personal policy on publishing, if I want to make research today, I need to use these technologies as generative AI that are time consuming, even if I don't need to publish. I research equally. So
Okay.
what I try to say is that there are two problems that are not exactly the same. They are related, but are not the same.
Okay, got it. So you're saying in our research, we consume a lot of energy and cause environmental impact by this change of technology. Yes, we do. And the point of my talk is many people pretend that there are that there are no such big environmental impacts. And I'm saying, yes, there are. So now you have to make a deliberate choice. It's the same thing that we talked about with the moral and ethical decisions of, do I want to work for a company that produces weapons? I've had this conversation with many cohorts of students, and then the argument always comes up, but I have a family to feed. What do I do? Can I let go of that job? I'm not saying this is an easy choice. I really don't. And it's the same with everything that we do in our research. What we cannot do is pretend we don't know. It's like, now you're making an informed choice. And I can't make that choice for you. I'm showing the environmental impacts and I say they matter. Yeah, we have one more question there in the middle and then also here. But I don't remember whose hand that was. It's already answered, okay. Thank you. There's a mic coming.
Thank you very much for your engaging keynote. And you mentioned it in a few places that there is a lack of transparency. So if I use a digital system, I really can't see what's going on. And me, as a trained computer scientist, I have a vague idea of what it means if I use an app on my phone, that there's like a whole network in between my phone and the cloud, there's the cloud computers and so on. But the general public doesn't have any idea of that. And it goes even further, you know, if I use ChatGPT, then there is the crowd of developers at OpenAI who may have not the best working conditions. So there's like, that's just the tip of the iceberg, you know. And would you say that getting more transparency into the whole system is one of the key points? And do you have any hints of how we could get more transparency into digital systems relating to sustainability?
Thank you. There have been a couple of works on that out there. So in 2014, I started talking with Ankita Raturi, who I used to work with at UC Irvine, about can we have a label for software in the way how we have nutrition labels? And say this is the percentage of fat, protein, and whatever. Can we do something like that for software-intensive systems? And for Ankita and me, that remained a proposal in our heads, and she did a little bit of work on it. And there was a more recent effort in Germany by Eva Kern and Stefan Naumann and others to introduce something like the Blue Angel for software products. The thing is, those certification measures, they take way long, and in the end, the project failed because the technology changes so much faster than anything that they could keep up with as a standardization organization. there could still be other ways. We could ask people to disclose impacts, and we now have the reporting directive for companies to report on their sustainability impacts, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. These reports are pretty big. Parts of them push in as much greenwashing as they can to make the company look good. Parts of them are so described that you can't sneak around them. The question is, who's going to make the effort to base their choices on that? If we think back to GDPR and how it's been handled, we do a quick yes click on most of the websites that we get on. So it's dealt with from the side of the companies legally. Do I make different choices as a user? If I train myself really hard, then I'm going to minimize certain things. So I think the way to transparency is the least that we can do. I'm not sure that by itself it's going to be enough. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Birgit, for this really great talk. I really enjoyed it, and my head is full of thoughts. And I'm also really impressed about the availability of checklists and guidelines that are already available to address this particular topic in projects. I'm now wondering, if I was now doing a new project, do you think I would be able to apply all these kind of guidelines in the projects to incorporate sustainability, or would it require like a dedicated role, like a sustainable responsibilist, or however we would like to call it, and what kind of expertise is required to apply this?
We made a workbook, the one that's hidden behind that QR code, to enable people who've never ever thought about sustainability before to run that workshop. We've worked with a professional design agency to improve from version 1 to version 2, and by now I think it serves pretty well. So we have actually had companies reach out to us that used it without us even knowing about it, and they said, hey, thank you. Like, there was one person from IBM who reached out, and we were like, yes, major players. And then when we tried to get back in touch with them half a year later to be like, so how was the follow-up? That person had left the company. However, there were companies that used it, that found it somewhere and used it without us even knowing about it. There was also a Finnish tech company. They've even taken a couple of the principles on their website to say, this is what we focus in our software engineering, so we were happy about that. It is absolutely doable. And I would love for people to try it out and let me know how it worked for you.
Hi, thank you for your enlightening talk. I was wondering, because as a consultancy company, we very often offer cloud solutions using Azure or other Microsoft products, or Amazon Cloud or whatsoever. But for me, there's therefore really little control on how much sustainability we apply. Do you have any recommendations or advice on how to manage sustainability in the products that we offer for our clients?
It brings me back to something that we talked about in the panel yesterday, and that's the simplify piece. So we tend to offer very encompassing and complex and comforting solutions that are often way beyond what might be needed. So I obviously don't have a good understanding of your exact project scopes and anything like that. I would like to think that consulting companies are often called in to kind of rework something that ain't working. That often goes along with, do you actually need that many people to do this? Maybe we can lean something there. Maybe we can also make something leaner in the IT solutions. And there is green cloud providers, and yes, that is only a little step of the way. There is people that use renewable energy, and I also know if I pay Göteborg Energy for green energy, that doesn't mean that the energy that flows into my device is going to be green. It just means I support with my Swedish krona their extension of the renewable infrastructure. But it could be a step in the right direction to say we at least invest in the renewable part of these technologies. We minimize what we have. There is, by the way, a very interesting workshop that's going to happen in June that's called Limits of Computing. It's run completely online. It's an ACM workshop that I've been part of over the last decade or so. It's been running now. It is running mid-June, and they talk a lot about how can we reduce what we do in computing, how can we bring it back to what is necessary, and also how can we include some of the people that are usually on the other side of the digital divide. So maybe that is of interest to some of you. I know that's only a very partial answer to what you're asking, and that's what I got for now.
Thanks anyway. It's good to brainstorm about it. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed I have one. Thank you very much for the talk. It's just a question that it's something that always comes to my mind when people talk about sustainability, and it's about the dimension of the sustainability that there's in the money that we use to pay sustainable actions. Like, I don't know if we take into account this thing. For example, I'm going to say it with an example. If we take a green trend, the most green trend that you can ever imagine, that reduces all consumption, but you use money that comes from non-sustainable actions, is this action sustainable? Are we taking into account these things when we take sustainable actions?
Thanks, that's a great question. So we get to a scoping question. There's an entire discipline called life cycle analysis when we talk about, is this more sustainable than this? And the answer very strongly depends on the scope that I have for this. So for example, what's your first hunch? Well, it's clearly more sustainable to drink out of a reusable water bottle, right? But I could reuse this one afterwards. Sorry? I could reuse this one afterwards, right? Make that my new reusable water bottle, because that one, to produce this one, was clearly less environmental impact than to produce this one. What if I make the scope larger? So there is an interesting systems thinking game of the answer changes depending on how large I choose the scope of the system that I'm looking at. And it's a little bit similar to the question that you're asking, because there's this sustainable action of taking the greenest train ever, and then taking into account, but where did the money come from that I bought the train ticket with increases the scope a lot. And so the answer might change. And then there might be another scope change that, again, changes the answer. So it depends a lot on what is the scope under analysis and what are the metrics that I end up evaluating at the end of the day. This is a super good thought.
Thank you very much, Birgit. I have a question because for what I interpreted from your talk, in your university you have been in these leverage points quite high in this, I don't know, in this angle or in this table, let's say, I don't know how to call it, in the stick. Scissor, okay.
This is the lever.
Yes, and you were mentioning that in your university, of course, you started the CO2 budget. This is how we call it in our university discussion. Also, the inclusion of the topics on sustainability in the syllabus and so on. So can you share with us how was because that demands these changes at this mindset, also the social structures and so on. Can you share maybe some experience on how this was for the people around, or how this change happened? Because I think this is quite difficult in many of the cultures and the organizations where we work nowadays.
Yes, so last year was part of our internal assessment for Holtbucket, for sustainability at the university, and we looked into all those different work areas. So they look at physical labs, physical workspaces, they look at the university buildings, they look at the infrastructure that is needed for people to commute, to get to the university and to get back home. They look at the business travels, they look at the IT infrastructure and the services that we buy. So there's a pretty big scope, and there is a lot of improvement that has been made over the years. And then the higher up we get, the harder it gets. And when I think about this example that I was bringing earlier of conference travels, that actually stands in contrast to the point that Xavi was bringing up about, well, we have to show research output, and part of that is publishing and so on, and doing state-of-the-art research. So now I get to go back to my boss, who stands for, well, the person deciding on behalf of the university, to ask, well, which one is more important to you, the CO2 footprint that we're causing, or the research output that we're making? And we're at the very same decision point as all of the companies, IT companies that I have talked with when we talk about their sustainability. So it's exactly the same game for us at a university level, where I have to say, okay, are you willing to make a choice? It is written in the university mission. Are you willing to compromise on that thing in order to significantly improve our environmental footprint? I don't have a clear answer yet. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Thanks.
Thank you again. Thank you from all of us, and this is from the organization. This is designed by Gaudi. So
Wow.
it's a piece of history, especially because this is produced by the company that is the only company that is allowed to restore the opera of Gaudi. So
Thank you so much. I love it. And it's my favorite color. Whoop. I just wanted to show you all because it's really pretty. Thank you.